Hello. Thank you for watching our Canadian Authors Association Toronto Chapter's event, Creating Underrepresented Stories. I'm Chris Gorman, current national co-chair of our association, and events like this one are of critical importance, not just to Canadian authors, but to the world as a whole. Writers have honed language skills that can be used to rally our communities to act. Those of us who are not BIPOC can listen to, learn from, and support those who are. All of us can advocate for change. We can extend hope and stand with those calling for justice. We can solicit, gather, and disseminate stories rooted in BIPOC experience. We can engage in difficult discussions about racism, and we can act with compassion and courage. We can help to educate. As writers, we can be a force for good. In tonight's event, we hear celebrated Canadian writer Morgan Christie and American writer Idris Grey reflect on their journeys, their experiences in getting their work published, how far we have come, and how much farther there is yet to go. So, without further ado, let's turn it over to them to discuss the importance of diversity in literature.
Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for attending Canadian Authors Association's Toronto Chapter's event, Creating Underrepresented Stories. Today, we're going to speak with two award-winning authors, Morgan Christie and Idris Grey, about their journeys from amateur writers to prize-winning authors that celebrate everyone's unique experiences, cultures, and identities. Having diverse characters that tell diverse stories allows our readers to see themselves reflected in story, and in many ways helps give people a voice and the confidence to be who they truly are. So I think it's incredibly important in this world in which so much hate dominates. So I'm really happy to be able to be here and help coordinate this event. So I'm very excited to speak with Idris and Morgan. So we're going to start tonight with readings from Morgan and Idris. And then we're going to move into a short question and answer session, and then a discussion about tips on creating stories that touch readers and about how important diverse books are in today's society. So, Idris, I believe, is going to read first. I'll introduce Idris. So Idris Grey is a Black writer, book reviewer, and sensitivity reader, specializing in queer multicultural stories. They have been a reviewer for Publishers Weekly since 2018. Idris was in Wattpad's STARS program for 3 years until its dissolution, and a member of Wattpad's creator program since its inception in 2022. Idris is represented by Claire Friedman from Inkwell Management. So Idris, I will turn it over to you to read us an excerpt from your work.
Hello. So I've never done a reading before, so I hope you'll kind of be kind with my nervousness. And please ignore the sounds. My dogs have decided they wanted to attend the meeting as well. In addition to loving multicultural queer stories, I also really love speculative fiction. So I'm going to be reading you an excerpt from a currently trunked novel of mine. Essentially about queer multicultural witches gone awry. So I'll try to read slowly, but please forgive me if I try to speed through it like Speed Racer. Okay. When magic makes a mistake, it corrects itself by two means: creation or self-destruction. When magic powered the hands that killed Saniqua Gales, magic made a mistake. In order to set that mistake to rights, as much as murder can be set to rights, magic chose self-destruction. In an evening, 4 witches lost their ability to foretell, to conjure, to capture, and to cast. 4 witches became mundane, their bonds to the elements and one another lost, their great destinies diverted for the more ordinary. Magic, as alive as the right hand of nature could be, considered justice served. But magic isn't the only creature doing the judging. Summer 1998. We made a mistake, said Anne, stating the obvious. She did that often, since none of her friends ever seemed to see what was right in front of them. No, duh. Irma hugged herself. Even in her oversized sweatshirt, she was freezing. The cove was never usually this cold in summer. We have to tell somebody, Anne again, hoping someone, anyone, would back her up on this. Why is it always me? Demi put an arm over her shoulder. Demi always had her back when it felt as if nobody did. We can't tell anybody. I can't go to jail. My granny will kill me. Cole's voice would lower and deepen after his transition, but for now it was high and scared as it would ever be. Cole's grandma was all he had. All any of them had, really. Irma pulled at her own hair. She'll kill us for getting you into this. We can't. Anne was a broken cuckoo clock. You gone. They had done that. We won't have to. Her sister will come looking for her and we'll be found out. You know they all think we're strange to start with. They were strange. Belhaven was strange, built on the ruins of civil war and still fighting it under all the genteel smiles and petty gossip that made up life in this little town. Cinque had been strange like them. The wrong color, the wrong family, too little money, broke and made to be broken just like them. We made a mistake. You saying it won't make it any better, Anne. Demi loved shouting when she was angry. She simmered with anger every day. Calling it something else won't make it untrue. Look, we thought she was possessed. We were wrong. This wasn't a biology quiz. We didn't dissect a frog wrong and get embalming fluid everywhere. We killed a girl because we thought she was up to no good. You're saying she wasn't? I'm saying she wasn't the devil like we thought she was, and we flayed her like she was. I'm saying we don't get out of this without paying the cost, and I don't know what that'll rightly be. Cole shuddered. What do you mean? I mean, the Book of Shadows said we're never to turn our powers on the innocent. Anne pointed at Siniqua's tear-stained face. Her tears were already drying, her body cool on the leaf-strewn dirt. That's what we did to her. We don't get to keep doing magic like this. You know it, and I know it. So what do we do? Asked Irma. I don't know. But if we don't do something, she will. Nature was always watching. Her balanced book was always right. All in favor of binding our powers? Asked Anne, raising her hand. Cole stood, arms crossed, at the farthest edge of the ring of witches. Y'all are out of your minds. We worked for years to get this good, since they were little and had found the occult section at the local public library. They all but lived there now. All in favor? Anne repeated again. Irma and Demi shared a distraught look. Magic was the gift that had given them someplace to belong. Without it, where would they go? Before the boat could be counted, the crackling fire in the rock ring pit before them began to crackle anew. Spitting sparks into the night air and licking toward the perimeter of the pit, the fire began to dance, undulating in the still air, flames shimmying as if to music, resolving into arms that tapered into hands and hands to fingers, all of which were reaching for the young witches kneeling in the sand, entranced at the sight. A voice rose up from the brackish water, not a woman, not human, something greater. You witches for have sullied magic, this downfall yours is all but tragic. With lies you've sown folly and strife, and all you've slain an innocent life. For your crimes there can be no clemency, your gifts are now bound until eternity. The limbs of fire tightened like loaded springs to be unleashed with an exploding howl. The fire leapt out of the pit and split into 4 separate directions, 4 comets trailed by fire, flying ballistic but not aimless for each and every young witch in the clearing. The first limb struck Anne between the eyes, red as rage, burning white hot. She went down screaming. The second struck Cole in the chest, sun orange, glimmering gold. Cole collapsed without a sound. The third shimmered like manacles around Demetria's thick wrists and bound her hands in silvery mist. She fell to her knees with tears in her eyes. The fourth and final tendrils poured into Irma's mouth and down her throat, muffling her shouts for help in a grisly gray smoke. It stole the breath from her lungs. She was unconscious in seconds. At 6:30 the next morning, the 4 witches would rouse in the front gardens of their homes, their belongings packed and their goodbyes said. They would not see each other again for 20 years. The Four Corners Covenant, Belhaven, Virginia, was no more. Thank you.
Thank you, Idris. It's lovely. And speculative fiction is one of my favorite categories, so big fan. Thank you. All right. So we'll turn it over to Morgan. Morgan Christie's work has appeared or is forthcoming in Callaloo Room, Prairie Fire, Athlon, the Hawaii Review, Sports Literate, Prism International, Obsidian, as well as other publications. Her writing has been anthologized in presses such as BLF Press's Black to the Future and the Resonance Network's Black Freedom Beyond Borders, Reimagining Gender in Marvel's Wakanda. Morgan is the recent recipient of the 2022 ARC Poetry Poem of the Year Prize, 2023 Prairie Fire Fiction Prize, 2023 Digging Chapbook Series Prize, 2023 Howling Bird Prize, and a Hurston Wright Legacy Award in Fiction nomination. She has been featured in media outlets such as BuzzFeed News, LA Weekly, NBC News, Poets and Writers, Yahoo News, the Forward Arts Foundation's National Poetry Day exhibit, and others. Quite a resume, Morgan. All right, so we'll turn it over to you, and looking forward to hearing some of your work.
Great. Thank you for having me and us, Chris. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And Idris, thank you so much for reading speculative fiction. I think it's such a wonderful platform to have the discussion that we're having today about representation, diversity, and kind of creating platforms for that. And so I just really appreciate that you chose to read some, because I don't have that in one of my sections, but I write it too. So I really loved your piece. And thank you to Toronto writers. Brandy, thank you for being here as well. And yeah. So I have 3 short excerpts to read for you all today. One of them is something I have in a novella that's coming out in a little while, and I have a couple pieces that are based in Toronto. Talking with the Toronto Writers Association, so it's nice to kind of write a little bit about home in the way that I've been able to with these few pieces of literary fiction. But I'm going to start with the piece from the novella Little Deaths. It hadn't occurred to Naya that she was wearing short sleeves. When she reached to pull them up after setting her plate down, the sensation frightened her. She brushed against her skin for a moment and thought herself a stranger. She jumped at her own touch. Her hands felt soft and pearly, likely from the dish soap, and she couldn't recall the last time they'd felt so delicate. Pounding away at laptop keys the past few years had made them hard, resilient even. So the sensation caught her off guard. She jerked her hand off her arm like she touched a hot thing, feeling as though something was in a place it wasn't meant to be. Naya reached for the steel wool. She found the niceties associated with the sponge useless. So she didn't bother wasting her time. She hunkered down and began to scrub, the same repetitive motion she'd taken since arriving home the day after she got the call. It was the first time she and her mother had spoken in months, not out of anger, rather having nothing to discuss. The time they'd spoken before was when Naya informed her mother and father, that the rights to her most recent novel had been picked up by a small film production company. Her father was ecstatic. Barely let her mother get a word in, either. When she finally said something, Naya retracted a bit. Her mother didn't do it on purpose, Naya knew. It was just her way. How they making it into a movie, and the book didn't even come out yet? Naya felt herself exhale, from deep within the throat, loud, uncaring, not realizing that she was likely on speakerphone. The sound came off much louder than she intended it to. A strained silence lingered for what seemed like an entire minute, and in that time she imagined her father nudging her mother, or maybe making the slightest of head gestures to hide the obvious mediating motion, as though Naya were there to see it. She imagined his eyes moistening from excitement and dispiritedness at a time it should have solely been the former. She imagined him staring at her, hoping she'd do what she eventually did. "That's good, Anaya. Real good," her mother whispered. Naya heard her father smile through the phone as he jumped back into miscellaneous detail ponderings and inconsequential fact checks. It was the last time she'd heard her mother's voice until about a week ago when she told her, "He's gone, Naya. He's gone." Okay, So that was from a novella, Little Deaths, that is out by Stillhouse Press. Got to put that plug in there. And so the next piece is, these are new pieces now. These are those pieces from and about Toronto that I am really excited about, kind of new things I'm trying to put together. And so this is a little snippet of a piece called Sapphire Girl. The crackle of the hot comb millimeters from your edges is a cautionary sound. Ask anyone who's ever had it there. No one needs to tell you to hold still or jerk your head forward the way they might do with cane rows and braids. You naturally go stiff as a board. The sizzling against your scalp sets in a type of fear that only worsens after your first burn, which inevitably comes to us all. The smell that follows is a reminder, not that you need one. That burning aroma of hair and fire-resistant grease sing songs of warning. Sometimes I get a glimpse of the smoke that presses off the back and sides of my strands when Ma hot combs, and I wonder if it's worth it. The hours-long routine and innate terror of having my ear burned off. I sit through it every week, though, Sunday mornings after breakfast. I sit at the table and wait as my curls turn to silk, feathering across my shoulders and deep down my back. I sit and hold my breath. People say it's a wonder my hair is so long with the amount of heat we keep to it. But this is the way it's been since before I can remember. Pop says, I got it from my auntie, my Aunt Junie, back home. That hers went down her back even further than mine. She was the only sister in the family of 8, and her hair was as strong and resilient as she. When the cancer got her a few years back, Pop said not being able to bring her here with him, would be one of the few regrets that he'd carry. He's the one that gave her the nickname, after a juniper tree. He saw one once, off a mountain's edge, the way it sprawled and open, like it wasn't afraid to be as big as it was tall. Like you, he told me, was what he said to her when he was 8 and she was 2. So I'll call you Junie, Lil Junie. Okay, it's a second, and I know my time is almost up, so I'm going to read one more short piece. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to read one more short piece, another one based in Toronto. And this one is called Clemente. He doesn't live in the Black Creek neighborhood further north by Finch, but on Black Creek Drive, where Trethaway intersects at the heart of the city's West End, where the creek still runs alongside swirling cars and brittle roads. The Black Creek close to where the old Pizza Hut lived, and memories of my parents still being in love fester with the smell of the Sunday bar and nerds I used to inhale. Where bites of greasy pan crust buffets and orange crush paired together the way I know red wine and meat do now. Where Trethaway faces Division 12, the park I'd play with at my brother. And on a wooden jungle gym riddled with shards that would eventually splinter our skin during those hot Toronto summers I'd spend with Dad. The park where Darius would tell me not to yell too loud when a sliver of wood finally pierced my finger. Because we didn't want 50 coming over to see what was going on. But we're not doing anything wrong. Who cares if they come? I said to him once. You should, Peter, Darius said back. He never said it, but I knew it was his way of reminding me of my Blackness, as if I needed it, because I was mixed. I lived with my mom and her husband in London, not the British one, year-round. And because my complexion was as white as theirs, Darius always joked that I looked more like my stepdad than real dad. Mom would say he was just picking, that that's the sort of thing brothers do, but I wasn't so sure. It felt like something else when it would happen. The reminders and poking about the ways we were different and the same. It felt like it was something he wanted me to think about, and not in a bad way, in a way that made him my older brother. It was mostly Darius that would take me to the park. We'd race down the sidewalk with our 50-cent freezies and let them melt, almost turning into juice before chugging them like we were at a playground rager. We'd trade Pokemon cards in the middle of the dirt-patched field, and he came out on top every time. But I wouldn't care, because when I was with Darius, I was a brother, and it might still be one of my favorite things to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. It's fantastic as well. I love that they're local stories, able to actually picture a bunch of those streets, and spent a lot of time around there as well. So that's pretty cool. Awesome. All right. So before we get into our discussion, anybody from the audience have any questions that they want to ask Idris or Morgan?
Am I allowed to ask questions too?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Because I have a question for Idris, just in the realms of speculative fiction. And when you think about spec or, sci-fi, fantasy, whatever kind of realms that we work in genre, how do you see it as a platform that's conducive for diversity and multiculturalism, the way that I believe you use it, because I just heard your work. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. And before I answer, I just want to say I loved your excerpt. That second one in particular, I felt that that you experienced the hot comb. Yeah, I've been there. But to your question, I think it's in terms of how speculative fiction is conducive to promoting diversity or elevating diversity. I think it gives us the opportunity to, one, reflect the present and the future, in the sense that it is an almost disarming way to reflect. I hate using this phrase, but social ills or struggles or what have you, in a way that perhaps people in the majority, or at least outside of a certain marginalized group, can either apologize to my phone, can understand outside of pure empathy, because it takes them out of the role of perhaps being the recipient of a kind of privilege or a kind of supremacy, and sort of opens it up for them to see the experiences of marginalized people really today in marginalized people who will come. So that's one thing I really love. And sometimes, unfortunately, you really do have to, give people that spoonful of sugar of distance to get them to take the medicine of recognizing the world as it is. So I think that's one of the things. And it also gives you the power to imbue equity into fiction. Equity that maybe doesn't currently exist, and be that equalizer sudden superpowers, or be it some apocalyptic event, or some other way of unearthing reality, or unearthing reality, clarifying what's going on. And I love that. I love it as the equalizer. I love it as the great shakeup that doesn't, as is often the case, immediately roll downhill on people who already lack, or who are already at a disadvantage, or who are already, unfortunately, tend to suffer when things go wrong. So I like that. I like being able to just upend the status quo. And I think that's one of the most, I think it's one of the most powerful aspects of speculative fiction, is it opens the door to do things like that.
Yeah, I completely agree, and specifically love the premise of the kind of great equalizer being in that formation, as well as the distance that you discussed. I think that was something I started recognizing in the power of spec when I've always had an interest in sci-fi. I grew up watching, all the Star Treks, and I started seeing and understanding, right? Started seeing and understanding some of the broadness and the socio-political aspects. Like this, it is a very, very political thing. And I didn't understand that as a kid. But coming back now, I was like, oh, okay, well, there's this really unique platform that, yeah, like you said, creates this distance, kind of creates this platform to be able to have these conversations and to make it palatable in a way that we shouldn't have to make it palatable. But it's reality, right? It's circumstance. And I think spec has a very powerful way of doing that work as well. And so when I see more of us, entering that space, that are, coming in from these newer generations and kind of continuing to have these like very contemporary dialogues about different themes and world issues and the social ills that exist in that forum, it ends up being just even more powerful. And I'm always so refreshed and happy when I get to, see who's writing it, and what we're talking about in this space. So thank you for saying that. Yeah.
And I hope to read some of your spec fic too, because I'm sure I mean, just your powerful prose put into that genre terms, I think it's going to be really effective. And as someone who also loves Star Trek, I want to see, Black girls or Black people of various genders getting their hair straightened in space, or getting their hair straightened in the year 3000, or not getting their hair straightened, whatever their choices they make for how they face the world. I think that's really important, and it's something not to lose sight of, that great commonality so many of us have as we're moving out into the universe and into the future.
Completely agreed. Thank you, Idris.
Agreed 100%. And I think one of the things that I've always loved about fiction in general, including spec fic, is its ability to, it sort of slowly sinks through you. So people who might have a really hard time accepting things when being told them, or seeing them in the news, or like reading a nonfiction or a newspaper article, it sinks in a different way and percolates. And I like the words that you used with the equalizer and the great shakeup, and really gives people the chance to understand from a different point of view. So I think that's 100% on point and important. When we had Morgan on for our podcast, Morgan, Brandy, and I were in serious danger of geeking out for a long time over Star Trek. So all big Star Trek fans. Do you have any other questions from the audience?
Can we ask after the discussion? Or is this the only time?
I'm sorry?
I said, can we ask after the discussion?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, and even like as we're in the middle of the discussion, if there's something that you wanna something tweaks you and you think, I really wanna ask this question, maybe don't interrupt, but if you could either raise your hand, and then at a break we'll ask, or you can type it in the chat and we can find a good time to answer. Did you have a question, Brandy?
I'm coming up with a couple of questions as I'm listening to everybody talk, but then I think Nikki had a great point there. Maybe I'll let you guys discuss, because you just had some great questions with each other that almost felt like a great lead into the discussion. So I feel like maybe if you want to do that, and then we can follow up afterwards. Absolutely. So maybe I'll ask one of my questions just to start it into the discussion. All right. 'Cause my question is actually, again, for Idris. I saw that you offer sensitivity reading services on your website. And I'm I like that. And I would be interested in hearing more about that. And if you could talk about that for a minute or two, that would be amazing.
Yeah, of course. So I love reading. I mean, it's very hard to become a writer if you don't love reading. And as Morgan said, I love speculative fiction. I love Star Trek. I'm a huge Trekkie. I can't even get into it. But something I've observed in like a lifetime of being Black and being queer is when people don't quite get it right. And it's not always malice. I mean, the truth is a lot of people don't know what they don't know. And then they go on to perpetuate. I don't want to use the word ignorance, because that sometimes feels a little unfair, but sometimes it is ignorance. And it can, excuse my dog, they have opinions, that can be harmful. And around the time when, we need diverse books and all manner of sort of movements were taking off, I became involved with sort of that circle of sensitivity reading. And what that is essentially I offer my experience as a Black person, as a neurodivergent person, as a queer person, and an author, a screenwriter, it's been a few people, publishers even, will come to me and they'll say, hey, we have this work and it features Black characters or queer characters or maybe neurodivergent characters. Would you look at it for us? So that's what we do. I mean, it's really almost like a cultural consultant or an expert. And we're not the voice of our whole community. We're just one person with this lived experience who goes through it and, kind of goes, well, you're leaning on a stereotype here. Or you've used a turn of phrase that can be quite indicative of maybe a little bit of racism. And this is maybe this trope is a little transphobic, or this is that and the other thing. And sometimes it means they have to go back to the author has to go back to the drawing board. And other times it's just, I didn't know that, or I didn't know anyone who had this experience. So it can be something like dead naming for a trans character. As times have moved on, thoughts about whether it's okay to talk about the former name of a trans person have shifted. And so before it was very normal to use that old name. But now it's considered sort of, if you forgive the phrase, a little blasphemous, a little disrespectful. So what we tend to do is refer to it, but not use it. Someone who isn't trans, doesn't know trans people, may not have that experience. So they'll think, oh, well, that's just the name they used to go by. But it's often used as a way of harming a trans person who has transitioned, who may have changed their name. It's a way of invalidating that identity. And you obviously don't want your book or your show or your podcast to do that. So I would read through it and I would say, maybe don't do that. Or maybe if someone made a reference to a Black person's skin tone in food terms, and there are mixed thoughts on that. These will be just my perspective. And I'd say, sometimes it leans towards fetishization. Maybe don't do that. Maybe come up with another way of having that conversation, describing that person. This is something I've seen a lot with a lot of authors, is when there's violence, there is an odd penchant of focusing it at Black women. And it'll be stories that involve all kinds of people. But sometimes when the violence gets very pointed, I think 2 or 3 different times now, I was like, you realize the only person who was subject to this sort of really graphic, gratuitous violence was a Black woman. And they'll go, wait, what, really? And then they'll read through the work and they're like, well, how did that happen? And I'm like, I don't know. And it's unfortunately cultural in a way. In our minds, or some people's minds, they'll go, this is the person who is either the most vulnerable or has the least value. It's not necessarily conscious. It's not necessarily me saying you're a bad person. This is saying you've absorbed ideas and you need to interrogate those ideas. I'm just the person there to point out what isn't quite right, in the hope that not only will it improve this work, but it will improve how they do their next work and how they face the world going forward, and how they face Black women, or how they face people who look and live like the characters they're writing. So that's really why I also call myself a bit of a cultural consultant, because my job is also to open people's eyes to their those inherent biases, those unconscious biases they have. So that's part of why I do it. And for readers too, because I specialize in children's literature quite a bit, and children don't know that the author doesn't realize they're putting these things into the world. They're just kids. They're just reading and absorbing and learning. And I feel it's my responsibility to paint a gentler picture and to help them absorb more loving messages about themselves, so that when they face the world, 1, they're less hurt, and 2, they're less likely to hurt other people. So that's sort of why I'm so passionate about sensitivity reading, in addition to writing and book reviewing. But yeah, so I've been doing that for about, I think, what did I say, 6 or 7 years now.
That's awesome. And yeah, very important. I like the point you just ended on there with children and how important it is that they can see themselves in a softer kind of more way that's beneficial for them. So I like that. Is you have any thoughts on that, Morgan?
Yeah. One that I think it's such necessary, such amazing work, but such necessary work. I didn't, and more so got introduced to the concept of sensitivity reads recently. I always knew that it was happening, and I knew that there were people that worked in doing that. I like the cultural consulting too. I really like that. But one of my first times, I think, kind of inadvertently falling into a role was it was reviewing. It was reviewing a book. So I got something a publisher asked me to read, and I guess I was just a little stunned at some. I can't speak on the specifics. I won't be too long about this, but I was just really surprised at some of the things that I saw. Not surprised, but I knew that particular press, and it jarred me that that was even a text that they had taken to the level of peer review because of so many of the issues and concerns that I saw. And so I did that, and then I had a professor of mine actually ask me to read over his book. He wrote a book about the history of Saint-Malo, which is specifically where the Filipino people settled in New Orleans. But he was integrating storylines that were associated with, with Black people, with other people of color that had settled throughout Louisiana as well. And so again, he asked for me to read, and so that's really been my experience with it. But I have understood, especially after seeing that text that I ran into, how necessary the work is and how valuable people that do this are to what's happening in the publishing sphere, because not only is it helping the writer move forward in the presses, but it's helping the public. Because if we continue to publish books that are, propagating and elevating these, these very problematic, stereotypes and nuances that are often integrated in the media, in literature, in all of these forums, if they keep getting published, well, people are going to continue to absorb them. And guess what? When they start writing, they're going to continue to write it. And when they, so it's just all this perpetual system. And so it just makes this work, again, so necessary in trying, no one's going to, not every press that needs sensitivity readers has them, but it's great to know that there are resources and people like Idris doing this work consistently, because it's just, it's necessary. I'll say that again. It's very necessary.
Absolutely. So I guess building on kind of what you both said, when I wrote my book, I wanted to include Black women and Black people in general, just to showcase them as characters, and because I think that's powerful. And I admit I didn't know anything about sensitivity readers, so I didn't at the time. I do now, and I would use one now, but I didn't then. Is there any advice that you have for someone who wants to include diverse characters in their writing, besides that could help make it easier for a sensitivity reader?
Morgan, would you like to go first, or would you like me to take it? Well, okay, so let me try that question two ways. Are you asking what would make it easier for a sensitivity reader, or what would make it easier for them to find one?
Let's say easier. So I've reached out to you as my sensitivity reader. What could I do as an author who wants to be inclusive? Thank you. Ahead of time, as I'm writing, that would help.
Well, I think the biggest thing, and this is, I think, for any writer, you really want to come to the process open, and as someone, and to keep in mind that your sensitivity reader wants to be a partner to you. They're not looking to tear your work apart. They're not trying to kill your darlings. They're not trying to cast aspersions on you as a person. And I know because our work is our baby, you know, even the most seasoned writer finds it really hard to be like, you know, throw the work out there and forget about it. So come to it as just part of the process of trying to make your work the best it can be, and not see it as a personal attack. Because I promise you, even if I've seen some wild stuff, but I never, or at least very, very rarely, have ever met an author and thought, what a bozo. You know, it's not about you. It's really just about making the work the best it can be and helping you improve your work. Like, I'm so serious. I think a lot of people, I think I've actually hurt people's feelings once or twice if they caught me on a bad day, but generally, I really just want to help you make beautiful work that readers love and that you love more. Because what feels better as a writer than writing the best work you can? Like, I can't imagine anything better than that. And being like, oh, you were so close, but tweak this thing, and you know, ask yourself if this language you're using is humanizing, and this, that, and the other thing. So really, just make yourself open to the process. And just in general, do your research. And this is easier said than done, so I'm having, as every person alive is different, there are facets to every culture. So you may very well write a Filipino person who is accurate to someone's experience, but in that same breath, that person's going to be inaccurate to someone else's experience, and that's really okay. So in the same way that you get comfortable with the idea that your work is not for everyone, you get comfortable with the idea that every portrayal will not land with everyone. All you can do is your due diligence to do as little harm as possible. You're a bit like a doctor that way. You want to do no harm, but failing that, do minimal harm. And that's really the best thing you can do as a writer. So as Morgan was saying, we don't want to propagate things that are hurtful. I'll say this, unknowingly. And this is a very, you have to be careful to thread this needle. You can put aspects into a story with the intention of subverting them or highlighting them or changing them later on. Not every reader is going to understand that. That's the risk you take. But the point is, you have to understand the quote unquote rules before you break them. So you see, there's a few different layers here, but basically, good intentions matter, but due diligence matters more. So just do your due diligence and be open to the process. And remember that the sensitivity reader is on your side, but they are also on your marginalized reader side. And you have to come to that agreement. You have to be on that path together.
Awesome. Thank you. It's an amazing answer. Okay, so is there anything that the two of you to discuss with each other just before we ask another question?
Morgan, what's it been like being in the literary short fiction, and you do short fiction, am I correct? What's it been like being in the literary short fiction space as a Black person, especially, you know, in Canada? This is going to sound terrible, so don't judge me. I don't know a lot of Black Canadians. So, like, can you talk about how it's been like to sort of navigate that sort of, I hate to use a sort of hallowed space of literary fiction? What's your lived experience been like?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. I don't know if I'm going to have a great answer because it's something I'm still trying to figure out. But I do work a lot in the US as well. I work and write in the US as well as I do here. But in regards to, I'd say that Canadian experience, I've found maneuvering through these past some years, I think that there is a notable and recent form of growth in regards to thematic integration, in regards to inclusivity and diversity, and looking for some of those patterns. And I don't know, just like in maneuvering through, any, I think, publishing market, and I speak to that in regards to not even just the commercial realm, whether we're talking indie, small, university, I think there are always barriers that are associated, and there's forms of gatekeeping that just simply exist and that are really perpetuated in most platforms. But I believe that there is slowly more representation being sought out. Frankly, even in having a discussion like what we're doing today, like in having spaces and platforms like this, are showcasing that there really is like, people recognizing that there is a need, a demand, and a gap. And so I believe that there are people just like, Chris, thank you for having us again. And, Brandy and everyone that's working to do this, there are people that are working to bridge. But as you know, I think just in knowing the industry, there are just forums that are difficult to maneuver through in our spaces. And I do a lot of work now. I've been doing a lot of research about trying to look at some of those disparities and speaking to authors, to presses, and trying to figure out what these fissures are and how they exist in this realm. But I think I really enjoyed what you said, Idris, about our experiences being individualized, that we do not represent the entire populace of people, I guess. And I think that's become such a form of that problem where I think that race is such a commodity. It's a commodification that's really utilized sometimes in this industry. And if you don't discuss the things that are being, sold or elevated at a certain time, it can be difficult to maneuver through those spaces. And so when you start recognizing that, I think it becomes a little disheartening in some ways. But again, as long as we continue to have platforms and spaces like this to have these discussions, it means we're working towards something good. So towards something better.
I agree 100%. And it's to quote, I think Chimamanda and Ngozi, I can't remember her last name, I'm afraid, but she talked about the myth of the single story, where essentially everyone is represented by one person, when in reality, we're all such an individualized version of whatever our experience is. Everyone from Texas isn't like me. Everyone from Toronto isn't like you or anyone else here. And so, like you were saying, that commodification about, okay, it's all about trauma now. Sounds horrible, but you know how it is. Or it's all about joy now, or it's all about this now. And then, but if you want to talk about trauma, because trauma is unending, they don't want to go back. Well, we're not doing that anymore. We're past it. Yeah, publishing's got a couple.
Completely agreed. You hit on the nail. It's something that, again, I'm really glad that we get these spaces to actually kind of call attention to, because I don't know, I think people have a really difficult time acknowledging that this is really something that is maneuvered through, many marginalized groups of people that write and that continue to try to work in publishing in that forum. And it's constant. And so again, in attempting to break down these barriers and again these forms of gatekeeping, because that is another form of gatekeeping in regards to your experience, what can be commodified, what can be sold, who you can be in these spaces, rather than being writers that are being writers and are choosing to use their experiences and being authentic to themselves. So we have a ways to go, but I'm glad we're taking the steps that we are.
Me too.
Thank you. And sorry, Idris, you said the myth of what was that?
The myth, and I may be paraphrasing incorrectly, but the myth of the single story. It's from the author of We Should All Be Feminists, and setting that. And I have some thoughts about her generally, but that was a very interesting point. I think she did a lecture about it and published an essay, but essentially it was the notion that we all are representative of everyone who's like us. So every gay person or every gay man, for example, is every gay man, and every Black person is every Black person. And so it basically says that when publishing publishes a book about any one thing, that's the book. That's the only book like it. There will be no more like it, because we don't, quote unquote, need anymore, because there's this idea that, again, it's all homogenized. We're all one thing. And so, yeah, you've made space for that one Black book. So there are no more Black books. There's, there's one book about gay people. There's one book about, I don't know, child stars who had it rough, and that's the end of it. And that's not reality. That's not a reflection of the real world. That's just, capitalism at work. And that's not the way forward. We have to make room for shades of experience. But yeah, so that's essentially my understanding of that speech. Now, mind you, it's been a few years since I read it, but
thank you. I love the make room for shades of experience. Perfect. So we do have a question from Nikki. Nikki, did you want to ask the question, or do you want me to read?
I can ask it. I'd just be curious to hear what are some writers or books that have inspired each of your own work, and what are some that you are currently reading and enjoying and would recommend?
Morgan, I think you're up.
Okay. Sorry. So as far as particular writers, authors, Nikki, you might know this about me already, but I always talk about Toni Morrison. If I get a platform to talk about Toni, oh, goodness, I'm going to talk about Toni. But I've actually just finished again this collection that I'm working on right now, and she kind of keeps integrating into the book because I've just been reading a lot of her fiction, and I started reading it when I was much younger, but the headway that she was making in regards to that premise of, yeah, I guess in that sense, eradicating the notion of the one story was something that she did throughout her career and in all of her writing. And it's so constant and so potent and powerful in seeing how nuanced she was able to be in maneuvering this publishing space and making representation mean what it did for so many people, so many people. As far as what I'm reading now, I happen to be reading a lot of stuff for, for school and research. So I'm reading a couple pieces on different forms of Black feminism at the moment. There are these kind of, I want to call them offshoots, but extensions that have been really interesting as of late. Things like trap feminism and hood feminism, and kind of like, looking at these different forms there. So there's a book that I'm reading. I can't remember the name, but I'll look it up right now and let you know. I'll write it in the chat.
what is it? Trap feminist theology or something? Was that it?
No, that's not. I know the one you're talking about, but it's not that.
Not that one.
No, I'm gonna write it. I'll put it down. I think it's.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, it's okay. I think it's. I don't know, but I'm gonna find it in a second. But Idris, go ahead anyway. I know you have to respond. I'll look that up while you're. Yeah.
Luckily, we're sitting right next to one of my bookshelves. I have many of them. Let's see. Some books that I love. I love Neil Gaiman. I'm a huge speculative fiction nerd, so love Neil Gaiman. I love, to a degree, Stephen King. I love Anne Rice. Mind you, when I say I love their work. I'm not endorsing everything they've ever said. Okay, so let's be very clear about that. But Terry Pratchett, Victoria Schwab, Dan Simmons. I actually think, let me think. I can never just pick one. As exemplified by the things I have here. But there's just so many. If you forgive me, I'm gonna butcher this name because I've never said it out loud. I've only read it. Tananarive Due, and Cherie Priest, and if I'd known this question was coming, I'd have looked up some. But yeah, and I'm in my art girly era. I've been reading a ton of graphic novels and comics, and some that have inspired me lately as I'm sort of moving through my practice from prose to maybe art and illustration has been Paper Girls by Image Comics, Brian K. Vaughan and Cliff Chang, and On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden, and of course, Indy Stevenson's Nimona, and an art style I just love. John Klassen, who wrote The Skull. What makes me happiest is being able to see the sort of eerie gothicness of everyday life, and stories that embrace that are so interesting to me. I can't believe I've forgotten her name, but the woman who wrote The Haunting of Hill House, which I should have a copy of up here, but I won't bore you by looking. And The Lottery, and We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Stories that aren't world changing, but that look at the tiny horrors of being alive are so fascinating to me. And of course, fantastic art too, and just eeriness, like the autumn as a literary category for me. That's what it is. So, all of that to say, I review books for a living. I've got an insane number of books, so we don't have time to get into it. But yes, that's my very rambling answer. Sorry.
So I love it. It's kind of what I go into when somebody asks me that same question. So let me start pulling out all my stacks of books. Made me feel really warm inside that you were doing that. So, MK also asked, what do you both think of graphic novels as a means of writing about social issues? And are there any trends you might be seeing / any favorites?
I love graphic novels. I literally just pulled out graphic novels. I'm actually working on one. I also do art. I don't consider myself an artist yet because I'm kind of out of practice, but I love it. I love the cinematic nature of it that doesn't necessarily require a camera, because you're creating the camera through your art. Yeah, I'm also kind of an art nerd, like very small N art nerd. So yes, I love that. And we are seeing it more. We are seeing, at least I am, when I review books, we're seeing more of a view towards multiculturalism and multiculturalism as the norm rather than as the centerpiece. And I think we talk about that a little bit. It's more slice of life than issue book now, which I think is great because you want to normalize that quote unquote integration, if you'll forgive the bunny quotes. And so that these wonderful, soup over melting pot stories are just all of these people coexisting and living their lives and being people and, facing aliens or facing homework or what have you. So I think we're seeing more of that, which I'm really loving. So it's not so much feeling like an intro to cultural anthropology class every time you open a graphic novel about a bunch of different people. So that's the trend that I'm seeing. Just normalization, just really normalization, and more people from different backgrounds given room to take up space on that very limited bookstore shelf of graphic novels. I mean, that's some of the things that I really love. And that's why, you'll see those books on my shelf, because those speak to me both in a tonal sense and in the sense that even at 34 years old, I can see my own life experience in those stories.
Yeah, I wanted to just piggyback off of that. Well, I'm going to speak to normalization in a second because that's the point I wanted to end on as well. But sorry, it was specifically the one I wanted to tell you all. It's called Bad Fat Black Girl by Sinsali Bowen. That's the one that I'm reading at the moment. And in regards to graphic novels, I've been seeing it as well. And it's actually something I've taught and made a point to, just because I think that there's this really wonderful immersion that can happen with visualization, and illustration, and story. Just like I think, need to think about auditory and tales and skill sets and kind of having stories told and recreated that way, especially associated with folklore and culture. It works that way to me as well with the graphic novel. And I think that there are some really wonderful integrations that have been happening in that space. And to Idris's point, I love what's happening in regards to this premise of what's considered normalizing, because we discussed needing to take these steps and continue to kind of break and work to break these barriers that are obviously still in place in these forums, but by the integration of, like cultural normalization and seeing that, well, there is still this trend, there is still this commonality amongst all of us in this space, will then, I think, help these things to not just be, diverse literatures or, literatures specifically of this particular race or that particular marginalized group, but literature. It's this notable dialogue that's happening with the shifting of the canon, I think, and it's time. It's where we are. And so I'm glad that we're able to be a part of it, at least in some way.
I second that 100%. And when and I know we're running over, so I'll be brief for the first time this evening. That actually puts me in mind of a couple of tomes I have on the shelf by R.F. Kuang, and how this restructuring of the canon to make space for different voices to become the standard. The way you've got your Hemingways and you've got your Shakespeare's and you've got your F. Scott Fitzgerald, and now that we're recognizing that other experiences can also be fundamentally shared, that opens up the canon to new people, to new groups. And I think that's so wonderful. Like you were saying, that cultural normalization, if everything is normal, obviously within reason, then everyone's voice matters. And I think that's really amazing.
Completely agreed.
So yes, I mean, like you said, we are kind of running down to time, so I'll keep it brief too. But I mean, I had all these questions written down. You did so well at just everybody had questions and wow, your readings and just the discussion. I mean, we'll have to have you back because there's no more time for my questions, and that's just terrible. But you ended on just a beautiful note. So I think I'll just thank everybody for being here. Thank you both so much for those wonderful, wonderful presentations. And I'll just hand it on. I'll go back to being quiet and hand it on back to Chris.
No, absolutely, Brandy. You hit it. We couldn't have ended on a better note than normalization and what Morgan and Idris commented on. So thank you so much for being here, and really hope that you'll join us again, because we'd love to have you back and love to have this platform to have these conversations on. We've always thought that this is super important work and very important to bring everybody. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. I really couldn't have had a better time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful
night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Night.
Night.